A recent study done in part by the University of Kentucky took a closer look at what's going on in our waterways. It's the most in-depth research study so far on the contaminants flowing through our rivers and streams. Hear more from the UK professor leading the charge.
So 95% of Kentucky's drinking water comes from surface water sources. And so it's really important that our rivers stay clean because majority of our water that we're going to be using to drink is coming from rivers. There are two different ways we were monitoring. We were doing what we call grab samples. This is where you take a bottle, you put it inside the water, and you grab a sample and you take it back to our lab. Then we also have this thing called a POSIS. And what this is it looks like a canister and it has this thing called a membrane in it. And that membrane will actually absorb different contaminants in your water and give you an average concentration of what we're seeing in your water. When you do a grab sample, it's kind of like a snapshot of what's inside of your stream at that point, versus the POSIS will give us an average concentration if you have a chronic situation happening in your stream that you wouldn't be able to see otherwise. More rural areas, particularly in agricultural areas, we typically only saw particularly pesticides one time a year, and that's not surprising. Typically, agricultural areas will apply pesticides in the spring when they're putting in their crops. It's a little bit different in urban settings, and we have a lot more yards with a lot more people that apply a lot more pesticides than probably is needed on your yards. And so in the urban settings, it was more of a chronic issue where we saw high pesticides in the water a lot, like throughout the year. So we've been working on coming up with what we call ecological solutions. This is trying to use nature to improve our water quality. And so we've actually been working on an engineered design wetland that you can put on things like ponds and reservoirs that actually will remove some of the contaminants without taking up any space around the area. So we've been working with a lot of farmers, wastewater treatment plant operators. We also been working with some of the distilleries on how we can use these to improve our water quality in our different water bodies. So this is funded from the National Science Foundation under a career award, and the key to those awards is you're trying to engage the community along with doing the research. Then we would actually work with the high schools and they would actually do the same experiments that we were doing at a larger scale at the University of Kentucky and validate our findings with what they were seeing in their own labs at their high schools. So this is an example of what we've been doing with the high schools. We have this in a much larger scale. Think of like bathtub size in our greenhouses at University of Kentucky's campus. The students will actually put the nutrients into the mesocosms, along with some of the treatments will actually have the emerging contaminant that we've been seeing, such as caffeine, atrazine, which is a type of herbicide. We've had some that have put sulfate from like where we saw in the mining area. And we've had a few that have put some different types of like things like imidacloprid, which is actually if you have a pet, it's a tea and flick treatment. We see that a lot of times in particularly urban areas where it doesn't stay in your dog or your cat forever. So it does end up entering into our environment and then later entering into our streams. People should care about this study because this provides us guidance on what our future drinking water challenges are going to be and how we can prevent more expensive challenges that our water treatment plants might have to deal with and potentially even prevent them from happening.
With additional funding already secured, Messer says they plan to expand the monitoring sites from 4 locations across the state to 20. During the session, Kentucky lawmakers passed Senate Bill 89, a bill that would align Kentucky's definition of the regulation of waterways with the federal government. Last night on Kentucky Tonight, I asked 4 lawmakers about the thinking behind the bill. Why do this? Many people feel like it is really going to imperil and further pollute groundwater by which and wells by which 1.5 million Kentuckians rely on. Why was this a good idea to align those standards with the federal?
I think one, just for clarity, it helps everyone play from the same page, if you will, and know exactly what we're talking about when you talk about the waterways. And clean water is really important. I mean, not just for drinking water, but for agriculture and our recreational uses. And I think what you're seeing is maybe an overreach by the executive branch for a while, and a lot of delays in permitting and getting, when you look at the Kentucky Farm Bureau, the Kentucky Home Builders Association, the Manufacturing Association, all coming together and saying we have a problem and getting permits and delays. Time is money in a lot of those areas. This was a response to some of that maybe overreach on behalf of the state government to overregulate some of those spaces.
I think tying us to a federal minimum is arbitrary, quite frankly. We can make more restrictive regulations with respect to water, and we do have problems in that area, and it's important for us to do what we need to do in Kentucky and not what the minimum is as dictated by the federal guidance. The problem is that we are advocating, in my view, our responsibility in that particular regard, and we should have retained that, and I'm very saddened by the fact that we took that turn. I think it's going backwards.
This bill, I got a lot of emails about. People are concerned that the government is allowing businesses to pollute their water. And they want to know why it is that something that is working is being rolled back. If they are having trouble getting permits, then what they should do is work on the process and the procedure, not endanger people. And most of the time, this is what's felt will happen, is that businesses will do some things that perhaps they should not do because we've allowed them to do it by rolling back the rules.
The reason for rolling that back was because we have become very bureaucratic in our regulations in the state, overreaching at some points. And you heard the examples, and on the floor, it was said that some of these just weren't coming true. Well, I know of an instance where there was permitting on a drainage ditch that the person had to go through in order to be able to develop subdivisions and things like that. There was a lot of overreaching regulations. We haven't relinquished any of our rights to the federal government. We still retain those. It's just saying that we're not going to be any more stringent right now than what the federal government is. If we want to come back in next year and do something, we can. We have not relinquished any of those rights, as was said on the floor as well. This is simply to rein in some of that bureaucratic regulation that we had.
We talk more about that issue and many other bills passed by the Kentucky General Assembly recently. You can see more of that conversation online on demand at ket.org/KY Tonight.